My date explained why women can't understand complex sports strategy. I've been coaching professional teams for 12 years. Derek set down his wine glass and leaned forward with the confidence of someone about to share a profound truth. We were 20 minutes into our second date, and he'd just started explaining why the defensive coordinator for his favorite football team, my team, was clearly incompetent. The play calling in last Sunday's game had been atrocious, he said, predictable and poorly timed. Any competent coordinator would have adjusted to the offensive formation they were facing. He used terms like cover 3 and zone blitz with the certainty of someone who'd watched thousands of games from his couch and genuinely believed that made him an expert. I took a sip of the wine he'd ordered without asking my preference and let him continue, curious how far this would go before I told him the truth. He pulled out his phone and showed me diagrams he'd apparently drawn himself, crude X's and O's representing players in formations I'd designed. The defensive coordinator, he explained while gesturing at his screen, should have brought pressure up the middle instead of from the edges, should have trusted the secondary to handle one-on-one matchups. Every suggestion he made was something I'd actually considered during that game and rejected for specific tactical reasons he couldn't possibly understand. Our starting defensive tackle had been playing with a torn ligament in his hand, information we hadn't disclosed to the media. Our strong safety had been in concussion protocol until Friday. Their offensive coordinator had done excellent work identifying our tendencies, but Derek didn't know any of this, couldn't know any of this because he was a fan playing coach in his imagination. Then he said something that made my jaw tighten. The real problem with professional coaching, he announced while cutting his steak with surgical precision, was that it had become too political, too focused on diversity hires and media optics rather than actual competence. Women specifically had no business in coaching positions beyond maybe handling administrative tasks because the female brain simply wasn't wired for the kind of complex spatial reasoning and rapid strategic adjustment that football required. He said this casually, like he was commenting on the weather, then took another sip of wine and smiled at me like he'd just shared an obvious truth that I should appreciate. I set down my fork carefully and asked him if he really believed women were biologically incapable of understanding sports strategy. Derek's eyes lit up like I'd just asked him to solve a puzzle he'd been dying to share. He launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about testosterone and cognitive differences, about how men had evolved as hunters who needed to track moving targets and predict patterns, while women had evolved to gather plants and nurture children. He mentioned some podcast he'd been listening to, some guy with a background in evolutionary psychology, who apparently confirmed all his biases. I watched his mouth move and realized this wasn't just casual ignorance. This was a deeply held belief system, something he'd constructed to make himself feel superior. Our server appeared to clear our plates, and Derek ordered dessert for both of us without asking what I wanted. He chose some chocolate thing with raspberry sauce, then continued his lecture about why the coaching staff of the team I worked for, though he still didn't know I was part of it, was fundamentally flawed. The defensive coordinator, he said while pointing his fork at me for emphasis, was probably a token hire meant to generate positive press, someone who looked good in press conferences but couldn't actually do the job when it mattered. He said this while looking directly at me, oblivious to the irony, oblivious to the fact that he was insulting the woman sitting across from him, who had forgotten more about football strategy than he would ever learn. I interrupted him mid-sentence and asked if he knew my full name. Derek looked confused by the question, the fork stopping halfway to his mouth. He admitted he'd just been calling me Alex, which was the name on my dating profile. I told him my last name was Kensington, and I watched his face for recognition. Nothing registered, so I added that I was Alexandra Kensington, and that I'd been the defensive coordinator for the team he loved for the past 4 seasons. Full story on my channel and linked below.